They are defending their homeland. So, Napoleon said the moral is to the physical as three is to one. Clearly, the moral and the test of wills, Ukraine has the advantage here. And soldiers literally are defending their families who are in the village behind their trench line. Another thing that's interesting to me, how tech savvy the Ukrainians are. This mythology that, it'll take them too long to learn how to use something is absolutely false. They are very good at learning how to use new things. And the last thing, which is counterintuitive, they have adopted a Western style command and control methodology, which is very decentralized. You would think that after decades of being part of the Soviet military and the education, I think the last, and I don't want to overstate this, but the last 20 years where they spent with us in Iraq and Afghanistan, all the training that we've been doing together, and out of necessity, they became a much more decentralized, where colonels and captains are making decisions, not having to have the general officer come down and make decisions. They will launch a counteroffensive, I believe, within the next month to two, because I think the Russians actually are going to culminate again. And at some point, that balance is going to change. And I hope that the Ukrainians, I believe they are trying to build up a large counterattacking force, keeping it out of the fight, which means you have to take some risk in order to shepherd, to build up a force that could, in fact, go over to the offense. The third thing that they're going to do, though, I anticipate, is some sort of horizontal escalation to widen the conflict, at least in tone, in order to put pressure on our alliance to try and cause to break up the unity that the administration has helped to build, to attack that, because that is our center of gravity. And so I think those are the three main sort of themes we're going to see, that he would actually go after one of these logistics hubs that are being used to bring things into Ukraine. The only way I could see them doing that would be if they believe that enough members of NATO would say, hey, no way, we're not getting into a nuclear war over Ukraine. It was our fault. I mean, that's the sort of Kremlin fairy tale that they would like to promulgate. But I think that wiser people will say, the president of the United States could not be more clear. We will defend every square inch of NATO. And if they were to try something like that, what I'm pretty sure is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the Joint Staff, have given the president several options for all of these kind of things that don't have to be nuclear response. There could be massive kinetic strike. There could be a massive cyber strike that would wipe out Russia's financial sector. So we've got so many more advantages than they do. And I would imagine that that's being communicated to the Kremlin. If they could, they would be disrupting the lines of communication, but they can't. I mean, first of all, they don't have the precision munitions stocks to keep doing that. Bellingcat the other day estimated that the Russians were down below 30% remaining of precision munitions, because they have expended so many so far. And because of sanctions, they no longer get all the components needed to make new ones. So they can't make good what they have expended in terms of precision munitions, which would be required to, if you're talking about destroying railways and those sorts of things. Secondly, they don't have what we would call a dynamic targeting capability, where you can cue to targets of opportunity and then follow up with the strike. To be honest, they're very dangerous, but they're not that good at this kind of action. I mean, I had expected all along that we would be seeing Russian special forces, creeping around there, blunt. It's just not happening. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because I don't think they can. So I believe that this second big grand offensive is actually already started. What we're seeing is about the best that they can do. I think that the Kremlin is putting pressure on the general staff to get going and to have something to deliver before they were ready. I mean, the damage that they suffered in the first several weeks of this phase of the conflict was so severe. It takes a lot of time to reconstitute units and move them around, especially if you weren't already anticipating the requirement to do so. So they had to start from zero to begin rebuilding units, ammunition, replacing losses, replacing leaders, all of that. So I think they've started really before they were ready. And so what we're seeing also is a manifestation that they may not have learned or made the most important adjustment necessary, which is to focus your main effort at some place and then overwhelm the Ukrainians with all of your capabilities. Instead, they're attacking along this 300-mile kind of arc. And so they've got no real serious depth to be able to overwhelm the Ukrainians. I don't think they're going to declare victory, but they're going to declare credit for we did this, this, and this. And the only audience that matters to them then, of course, are Russians. But the Ukrainians are absolutely not going to be done. And the fact that Secretary Austin has said, United States we're here for Ukraine to win. And, Secretary Austin is very deliberate in how he speaks, and that wasn't him speaking off the cuff. I mean, that's obviously a policy decision by the United States, by the administration, and to weaken the Russians enough that they can no longer threaten their neighbors. These are two really big policy decisions. And then the $33 billion to back it up, which apparently has strong bipartisan support. The U.S. is in this for the long haul, and I think most of our allies are also. On the negative aspects of the Ukrainian side, the logistics, the distribution network inside of Ukraine is not prepared for what they're having to do right now. So even though all of us may commit to delivering all these howitzers and stuff, the real metric is how fast does it get into the hands of a Ukrainian artillery regiment to be able to use it, or the javelins, or the various other contributions. So I worry about the logistics distribution network inside Ukraine. And this is an area where I think we ought to be reconsidering our policy about whether or not we put people inside Ukraine to help with that. The other sort of negative is that they got started too late, not too late, they got started way late on standing up the Territorial Defense Force. I mean, we've got about 200,000 people in the Territorial Defense Force. That's more people than the Russians have in all of Ukraine. So that's a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that they're trained and ready yet. So we're playing a little catch up here. I do worry that we're running out of ammunition on the Ukrainian side, particularly for their Russian-made systems, the 122 millimeter and 152 millimeter. That's a problem in certain areas. On the plus side, the White House says that winning equals full restoration of Ukrainian territorial sovereignty. So that includes Donbass and Crimea. I support that 100%. President Biden said Ukrainian sovereign territorial integrity is a priority for the United States. He said that a year ago in his first conversation with President Putin. So this is not late breaking news. This is a way ahead, and I think the president puts this within the context of democracies versus autocracy. And I think also, and John, I take your point. These are lofty goals, but I think in the reality, he knows that the Chinese are watching this, and that if the United States, with all of our allies and all of our advantages, if we cannot stop Russia, a Russia that is not even able to defeat Ukraine, then the Chinese are not going to be terribly impressed with much of what we might say. And also the North Koreans are watching that if our alliance freezes in place just because Russia threatens to use a nuclear weapon, that'll be a dangerous signal to North Korea as well. So the
Iranians are watching too.
Without a doubt. And so anybody that has a nuke or wants to get a nuke is going to go to school on all this. So there are a lot of reasons why it is important that Ukraine is successful here, wins. And I would the difference maybe with this and what multiple administrations did or didn't do in Afghanistan and Iraq was the win word. Never did we ever talk about winning as policy in Afghanistan or Iraq. It was implied, we talked around it, but never win. And so when I think we have to be realistic, there's a near term, which Russians back to the pre-24 February line. To me, this is entirely doable within the next 6 months if we follow through on everything that we've said, that the Russians can be driven out. I tell you, I believe they are hollow. The longer part is going to require a long-term commitment to this full restoration of, basically, we're talking about Donbass and Crimea. I don't think it'll take the 40 years that it took for reunification of Germany. I don't think Russia itself is really going to last for another 5 years. So this is what I think winning is. And also you have to add in the Ukrainians will expect a return of the 500,000 citizens who were kidnapped and deported, that they are all brought back home to Ukraine. When Secretary Austin said we want to weaken the Russians to the point that they can no longer threaten their neighbors, I did not take that to mean that we're going to go inside Russia. I mean, that's a whole different thing. But I think the fact that Russians, their economy is obviously going to be in tatters for quite some time, and I would defer to you on this, but if the sanctions remain in place, decisions that the Kremlin made to cut off Poland and Bulgaria from gas because they refused to pay in rubles, that's going to backfire. I mean, that's just only going to accelerate people moving away from Russia as a source, as well as from carbon fuel as a type. Their population, 140 million. That's nothing for a country that size. So I think that when this test of will, that we can spin them into the dirt. It's not inevitable that Russia doesn't lose. I believe they do.
No, and if they lose, I think it keeps going. So the Ukrainians have no compunction about going into Russian territory. In fact, all sorts of things are blowing up in Russia for strange reasons right now.
There probably are some countries that would, when I hear people say the most important thing is stop the fighting, that really gives me heartburn, because that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is protecting, our values, protecting democracy, and making sure that all our other adversaries don't walk away from this thinking that they can get away with whatever they want to as well. I do think that President Zelensky right now has enough support from his own country to, I think they feel that all the trends are moving in the right direction for them, and that a little bit further, they're going to be at a much better negotiating position. And so I think that's why and of course, having the U.S. administration say, you're going to win, we're going to help you win. There's no reason for President Zelensky at this point to take a bad settlement that I think would probably be political suicide for him as well. Germany, just recently announced that they would support an EU oil embargo. Right. That's not gas, but that's oil. So that's an important step in the right direction. Interestingly, unlike when HR and I were very young officers, the Greens today, they're the war party. This is the three toughest German senior politicians are Minister Habeck, the Foreign Minister Baerbock, and Norid Omipor, who's a member of the Bundestag, the parliament. These are the three most serious security hawks inside the government. And the fact that the Bundestag voted overwhelmingly to support the delivery of armored vehicles, that's a big deal, I think. Now, you still have a large part of the German population. They are very concerned about escalation. You have a pacifist element of the society that's there because World War II is still fresh in the minds of many people, either because they're old enough to be kids, or their parents were. And so this is still a very real thing for them. Most of the Germans that I speak to, the vast majority, are outraged at what Russia has done. And I hear less and less and less of people saying, well, it was NATO's fault. I used to hear that a lot. I hear a lot less now. I think the images coming out of Bucha really changed attitudes. Putin is evil and he's brutal, but I don't believe he's crazy. I don't believe he wants to be, go down in history as the Nero of Russia. And I also think that there are people around him that are imagining life there will be life after Putin. He can't just have a bad day and start punching buttons in his office. I mean, there's a system around him, just like the way there is around the American president. And I'm not so sure that all of his the people who sit at the far end of that long table in his office are so keen to blow it all up. First of all, you're not going to kill 50,000 people with a tactical nuclear weapon unless you dropped it inside a football stadium and they were all there. But the effectiveness, the blast effect of most tactical nuclear weapons is not like a Hiroshima type weapon system. So there's no battlefield advantage for them to employ a tactical nuclear weapon anywhere.
Psychological.
They could not. Well, I don't agree with that. They could not destroy Mariupol or terrorize people any more than they already have. You already got 11 million people have left their homes because of what's going on, and I think that it would be impossible for the United States and other countries to stand by to not get involved if Russia were to use a nuclear weapon. That doesn't mean our response would be nuclear, but this would so change the character of the conflict that it would be impossible not to step in.
That's what I was guessing. Overwhelming conventional response.
This is what the F-35 was invented for. Just this, about 5 days, and everything that Russia has on the ground in Ukraine, and probably even their Black Sea Fleet, are gone. And I think that the general staff is well aware of that. Or U.S. and U.K. offensive cyber capabilities just would completely overwhelm whatever the Russians think they can protect, including everybody's bank accounts. I mean, there's no doubt that they could devastate that. So this is why I think it's just so unlikely that Russia is going to do it. Now, I've been wrong about 25 other times over the last 9 weeks on things. So this is why the communication from the White House is so important about making it clear. Because if we look like we're waffling, then I think the risk goes up. Ukraine, everybody was prepared much better than we might otherwise have been. The Estonians have been in and out of Ukraine a lot in the previous months, helping to shore things up. But I did ask the head of the Ukrainian gas company that manages all the gas there. And I said, I was in Kyiv like 10 days before this all started. And I said, are you worried about cyber? And he laughed. He goes, no, man, we are completely analog. It's people turning giant wheels. So they couldn't shut it down if they wanted to with a cyber strike on the gas. But I think there was preparation. The second thing is I think the Russians, this is connected to their over-optimistic approach towards what was going to happen. I mean, when I saw President Zelensky walking around with a cell phone on day 4, my first thought was, how cool. And then I thought, how the hell is his cell phone still working? How can his phone possibly be working at this time? Why have the Russians not shut down everything? And then when you start seeing all these Russian generals killed, it's because they're talking on their cell phone on Ukrainian cell network, because the Russians needed to use it. They don't have an effective mission command network that they take into battle with them. So they were clearly planning on using Ukrainian cell service, Ukrainian networks. And I think this is part of the explanation of why they didn't, crush it all. And then the third thing, I think they know, whether it was communicated or not, that the U.S. Could launch a cyber counterstrike that would totally disable big giant sectors inside Russia. So those are the 3 sort of reasons, I think, because I really did expect them to wipe it all out. If I was to have to teach a class on this, 50% of it would be dedicated to logistics. The ammunition consumption is just through the roof compared to our experience of the last 20 years. We forgot how much artillery ammunition, how much rockets, how much stuff gets used in modern lethal combat. the amount of artillery ammunition. I don't know if I'm repeating myself. 180,000 rounds. That's about 3 weeks of intensive fighting. So, and our industrial base right now is not prepared to do that. No matter how much money we gave to Lockheed, it would be a year before we saw any noticeable increase in the production of javelins. I mean, it's just so. This is an issue for us, and of course, understandably, nobody's parliament or Congress or Bundestag wants to pay a lot of money for ammunition that sits in bunkers that you hope you'll never use. So there's a challenge here, and the Russians are going through a lot of ammunition. The Ukrainians are. So it's ammo. It's about maintenance. This is tedious stuff. But the story about all the Russian tires that were rotted. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year to maintain equipment that sits in storage in climate-controlled facilities so that when you draw it out in a crisis, it's ready to go. I mean, people are changing seals, tires are being rotated, all of that. The Russians clearly have not invested in that. So there's a logistics aspect to this. The second big thing I think is about what we call jointness, where you bring together air, land, sea, special forces. Not once, not one day in this conflict so far have I seen a shred of Russian joint warfare, where the air forces were in support of ground forces, where what the Navy was doing was enabling maneuver anywhere. It's like there are three completely separate entities that are not helping each other, which is good for Ukraine, because when you start bringing all that together, it significantly increases the effect. And it's just not in their culture. And for us, it took the Congress to force us to do it with the Goldwater-Nichols Act, because we didn't want to do it either. And it's hard as hell. You have to practice it all the time. And this, again, the value, the importance of being able to conduct joint operations. Until they can do that, they're never going to get Odessa, ever. They're never going to get Kyiv. And I don't think they'll be able to hang on to what they've got. To do all those things, you would have to have a culture within the institutions that promote and encourage learning. I mean, I've always believed that the best organizations, the best units I ever saw were learning organizations, and had built in where the commander emphasized what we call the AAR, the after action review. All right, let's talk about what happened. I screwed this up, and how do we fix these things? And even in combat, units still go through. I'm sure HR did this when he was fighting. After an operation, you'd bring the lead guys back and say, okay, what happened here? How do we fix this? How do we improve this? And the Russians are absolutely not stupid. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but I don't know that they have the culture that encourages the sort of public self-reflection necessary to fix serious problems, including command structures. I missed it. I'm guilty of overestimating Russian capabilities. I talked to some of my Navy friends about the sinking of the Moskva. I said, what do you think about this? I mean, what's the significance of it? And of course, right off the top, they talk about, this is the flagship. So there's practical implications, there's symbolic implications. But one of them pointed out to me, he said, from the picture that we all saw of the ship as it was listing, clearly had been damaged shortly before it sank. Navy guys could look at that and point out, okay, there was obviously a fire the length of the ship underneath the deck. And you could tell that, of course, by the way, it'd be dangerous as hell, but there was no apparent attempt to save that ship. I mean, they unassed that thing as fast as they could. And in the U.S. Navy, I love our Navy, except when it's Army-Navy football. Our Navy, the ethos is ship, shipmate, self, in priority. Everything is about saving that ship, no matter what. And our sailors, every day that they are underway, they are practicing a fire, they're practicing water damage is the ship watertight, and various other type emergencies. And they practice it all the time. And it's the ethos that you do everything to save that ship and then look after your shipmate and then yourself. And it appears that the Russian Navy, the Great Black Sea Fleet, which is mostly conscripts anyway, does not have that same ethos that this, save the ship no matter what. And then the fact that they couldn't even be honest, well, we got everybody off. Well, actually, there's about 200 sailors never made it home. And so this culture of corruption and just flat out dishonesty, that pervades everything. And that's how you end up with people that feel it's okay to murder innocent civilians. And of course, Putin has already redesignated the unit responsible for the murder in Bucha as a guards unit. I mean, that's the highest honor you can give to a Russian unit, is they get the designation guards. And so there's the ethos that we're talking about, and that cannot survive. That can't be successful in the long run, because it erodes the stuff that makes units effective. It's trust. The vast majority of Russian troops come from outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. They come from the ethnic hinterlands. So you won't see too many funeral processions in Moscow or St. Petersburg because there's no troops that come from there, for starters. So that shields a big part of the public from the fact that there are at least 15,000. That's the number I accept. I've always thought the Ukrainian numbers were too high. Of course, my own soldiers exaggerated too. So, I mean, this is kind of a natural thing. But the British intelligence and Bellingcat, I think, are probably the most reliable sources for these kind of things. Bellingcat says 600 Russian tanks have been destroyed. If you assume that right there tells you 3 or 4 times 600, that's 2,500 troops right there, just from the tanks that were destroyed, let alone everything else.
And I think it's something, isn't it, Ben? Like something like 3,000 armored vehicles overall, or something like that, or is that right?
Probably so, but there's so many different types of armored vehicles. But in terms of tanks, now, and that 600 is 2 years of production. It would take 2 years. Normal production rates for the Russian defense industry, that's 2 years of production that are gone now. And what they've got sitting in storage, you can imagine the condition it's in. I asked, when I was in Finland last week, I asked the former army chief, I said, how come the Russians have not mobilized their reserves? And he laughed. And the Finns are the best in the world at rapid mobilization. He said, well, they would be humiliated. They've got a terrible system. They haven't practiced it, and they've got no equipment to give them. So that's why they haven't done it. And then they would also have to explain to the public, why did this special technical operation, I thought we were being welcomed as liberators. So there's some problems there for them that even the Kremlin has to take into account what the population thinks. And I don't know if you can hide 15,000 dead, and then whatever the number of wounded is, that 3 to 1 is probably a good estimate. It will be hard to hide that.
I want to go back to 2 things you mentioned. One is, how can it take a year to ramp up Javelin production? What is wrong with our defense industry? In World War II, the P-51 went from a dream to shooting the Germans in under a year. And we can't even ramp up something that we got the blueprints on in a year. So, question 1. I got question 2. But this running out of ammo on our side seems to be now. I know HR is going to want to go and put in tariffs on China to solve this problem, but this seems like what is this, like getting building permits in Palo Alto?
Well, John, let me ask you a question first, if you'll, because I'm interested in this also. How hard will it be for the president to liquidate the Russian assets that have been frozen? I mean, I read something by Lawrence Tribe in the Post a couple weeks ago, and he said that the president has the authority to actually do that. I'm sure it's not that simple, but I mean, does that sound? I mean, that's several $100 billion that could be used to
Well,
pay for a lot of this.